He meant every word of it when he said he hated his aunt and that he could kill her. Amma had left his room when a number of ideas came to his mind. He glanced over to the corner of his room and saw his machete leaning against the wall. The first idea hatched quickly. Take the machete, rush your aunt from behind and chop off her head. His heart beat faster as he turned the matter over. Blood pounded in his head and his body shook. His will urged him to act. Hatred for his arch-enemy mounted to flashpoint, but unconsciously he was holding on tightly to his mattress. He was afraid. He saw Yaro clearly in his mind. His friend would have objected to that idea. He gave it up. Slowly, another idea informed his mind. It came gradually, like a helper, a comfort, the way to end his troubles. The tension that had built in him began to loosen as he thought about this new idea. Oh yes, he sat on his mattress. He could see it clearly now. Wasn't his father at peace? Did his mother know any suffering now? Not at all. And wasn't he at rest? He saw their faces, peaceful and calm. The state of non-existence was so appealing to him that he was so surprised he hadn't thought of it before. There would be no wicked aunt to be bothered about, no mates to mock him, no punishment at school, no forced labor at home, no headache to battle with, no worry at all, like his mother and father and sister. The thought excited him as he sat on the mattress. He looked at his bleeding elbow, felt the cut on his forehead and the bruises on his leg. They ached, but nothing to worry about now. It will soon be over. He got up, took his shirt and wore it over his bleeding wounds. The pain drew his attention, but he ignored it. It will soon be over. He felt the weight of his swollen lips. He placed the finger on them and looked at the blood stains. He spat on the floor, but they didn't matter. He would soon be gone. He stepped out. Amma saw him open the main gate, but she did not interrupt him. His aunt saw him too, but ignored him. If he was going to sit outside, people were sure to see his swollen lips and bruised hands, she reasoned. But what did it matter? But Adu wasn't going to sit outside. He had a better idea than that. He thought about the train. Yes, that would do the work fast and thoroughly. Perhaps it would even carry part of him back to Susa to be buried with his father, mother and sister. He took the pathway towards the train station. Several hundred yards from the station, he branched off towards the west, where the rails led through to Susa. He waited by the rail. Along it he saw hundreds of canary birds pecking at stray grains. Others had made their nest on palm fronds close by, but these no longer interested him. He followed the rails with his eyes far, far away, where they seemed to narrow gradually until they vanished. He waited. A gentle wind began to blow. After what seemed to be an endless wait, he thought he heard the booming sound of a train approaching from the direction of Susa. The sound came with the wind, but when the wind died down, the sound died with it. He began to feel disappointed. The train too had joined forces that were militating against him. The train was the one which had transported him from Susa to Boama 2 years ago to undergo all this. Even the train was his enemy. The old hatred he bore for his aunt began to well up in him. He knew a place which, unlike the train, would always be there. That place would not disappoint him. The pain in his bruised legs and lips spread, but he ignored it and made for the place where his comfort lay, peaceful and waiting. He had to cross the town, and he did so without realizing it. He was heading towards the stream. He knew where he was going. The river in Boama was big and deep in places. He had seen it happen to his father. The water was his best friend now. It will soon happen to him and all will be over. He hurried to the river and went upstream to a place he knew of, where it was deep and wide. Soon he would be part of it. There it was. Reaching the place, he removed his shirt, stood in the bank and peered at his image. His lips were blood red. He focused on his aunt and allowed the hatred to well up in him again. He reflected on his life and all the pain he had experienced, the pain that would soon be gone forever and ever. He crouched at the very edge of the deep water, ready to jump in. There was no log to help press him down, he thought, remembering his father, but the water here was deep enough to swallow him. Before he jumped, he would think about some of the people he knew. They came easily to mind: Ama, Anane, Teacher Ofori, Becky, Mahama, Ya, Mother, Father. He stopped there. The rest could wait. But there was someone else he wanted to remember. He feared he wasn't ready to cope with the consequences of remembering that man. No, he wouldn't recall him. That person would spoil his plans. But he couldn't stop his mind roaming right towards that man in Susa. He wanted to avoid him, but there he was, in the little village, working on his farm, sitting in his room, reading from his famous book. There he was, striding in front of him to the nearby village. He focused on him for a while. So picturesque was the scene that he could not clear his mind from it, though he tried hard. Now Yaro was speaking to him. And there's a place we all go to when our work on this earth is finished. It was in answer to a question Adu had put to him about what happened to the millions of people who were dead. The scene which he had been trying to put out of his mind now interested him. He heard himself asking the question, and who decides when one's work on earth is finished? His friend Yaro had turned sharply and looked at him. Then in his usual patient fashion, he had replied quietly, God, my friend, God decides. A question formed in his mind now, which he had not asked his friend then. Supposing the question was imprinted on his brain, supposing one was tired of life and decided his work on earth was ended, what about that? Couldn't he decide for himself that his work was done? From where he was squatting beside the stream, Adu waited for an answer, but no reply came. Yaro was no longer beside him. A fish in the deep dark water splashed after a worm and alerted Adu. The same hatred he had had for his aunts spilled over against his friend Yaro. Yaro had destroyed his plans. For the first time, anger burned in his heart against Yaro. It was he who had just told him he could not decide for himself that his work on earth was finished. What was there left for him to do? His father was dead. His mother was dead. He had no relative who cared for him. Wasn't his life finished? Huh, Yaro? What should I do now? Tell me, Yaro. And the reply came, though he neither expected it nor wanted it. God is able to change even the worst situation to something better. He found himself in Yaro's room after his mother's death. Those were the very words Yaro had spoken to him when his mother and sister died. It was in the same season that his father was drowned. What did Yaro tell him about that? He had told him that God had spared his life. It was Adu who was being drowned when his father saved him. His father had sacrificed his life for him, Yaro said. And Yaro had then tried to compare his father with the savior he often talked about, who sacrificed his life for all people. Your father wants you to live, Yaro said. He wants you to live for him. His life is ended, but yours is not. Had his life benefited anybody, Adu thought? Wasn't his life full of suffering and misery? As he walked further upstream away from Yaro, he felt in his mind a trace of compassion for him. Then he knew how much his friend Yaro had influenced him. That quality of life he admired in Yaro revived in him a sense of his own worth. The brief encounter had revived something he wanted to hold on to. The pain in his body was at present as real as his hatred for his aunt, but he wanted to live. He made his way towards a tree further upstream, through elephant thistle that lined the bank of the river. He hadn't the slightest desire to go home, though it was now midday. As he made his way through the thicket and reached the tree, frightened birds flew above him at the sudden appearance of this intruder. Adu settled under the shady tree. He glanced around him. The large dry leaves which had fallen reminded him of certain parts of his father's cocoa farm in Susa. The grass had made a circle around the tree. He stretched his legs and leaned painfully back on the trunk, gazing up into the many branches. He saw a yellow bird which stretched its neck up and down to look at the visitor. From where he sat, he knew that he could drop that cheeky bird with one pull on a catapult, if he had one. But he doubted whether he was ready to kill. Better things than killing occupied his mind. Besides, he had just attempted one killing and failed. What was the guarantee that he could kill that bird? Times had changed. As the sun tilted towards the far west, twilight stole through the trees. A gentle air swept over his tired eyes. Exhausted from the mental, physical, and emotional strain, he soon fell asleep. Fear gripped Adu when he awoke to find himself in pitch darkness. He had slept too long. Quickly, he rose up and groped for the way home. But as he did so, he saw a beam of light moving up and down along the very way he had come. He heard quiet voices as two men parted the shrubs and walked towards him. "We must be fast," a voice said. "Let's hide it under that tree," another voice replied. Why did Adu seem to recognize the second voice? But there was no time to think as the voices approached. He stood there shivering. Should he run? In a split second, he decided to climb the tree, forgetting the possibility of snakes hanging from or creeping along the tree he climbed up. He got hold of a branch and swung himself gratefully up on it and lay still. As he lay there trembling, two men appeared and stood still. "Perhaps it was a rat," said a familiar voice. He directed his torch up the tree. Adu held his breath. "Let's be fast." "Where is it?" asked the other man. His colleague unwrapped something in a paper bag. As light fell on the objects, they sparkled. Then the man who held the light said, "Look at that. This is pure gold. Just look." Immediately, Adu knew who it was. He was so shocked he almost gave himself away with a yell. His fears vanished, replaced with curiosity and interest. "Dig here and let's be fast," said the other voice. The man he knew handed a torch to his friend and cleared dry leaves from a spot close to the edge of the grass and began to dig. "Every 3 days, we will move it until the matter is dead and forgotten in Buama. It could take months." "Yes, but we can wait, even if it takes a year. We shall soon be rich." They have more wealth than they need. That's why they bury their dead with gold when poor people like us have to toil day and night for simple daily bread. Then Adu understood. They were the grave thieves. But how could the man he knew be party to a deed like that? "Let's go," said a familiar voice. The man covered the freshly dug earth with dry leaves. Then the two men crept away. Adu waited until the torchlight had vanished before he got down. He was just about to rush through the dark when a voice within him said, "Take those precious things, boy." He stopped and looked in the direction the men had gone. "Quick, fool! Take them," the voice urged him. "If you took them, you would be rich in a few weeks, and then you could go away from your aunt forever." Stealing? He asked himself. This is not stealing, fool. 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 This is your chance. You didn't steal them. This is a gift from your father. You are not finished. Your aunts lied to you, unless you don't take them. He walked towards the place and squatted by it. He felt the warmth of the freshly dug soil, but suddenly his friend Yarrow was there again in his mind, telling him it was wrong for him to have gone plugging Appiah's oranges without his permission. Adu rose up and took to his heels. He ran through the tall grass. He found the way to the stream and ran towards the town. The whole day, Anani searched for Adu. No one knew his whereabouts. Anani had something to tell his friend. Something serious, a secret that has been hidden for many years. He had heard this secret a long time ago, but had decided to keep quiet about it. It involved Amma, and if it were revealed, both she and Adu would be affected. It was a secret about Goma. But now he didn't care. He must tell Adu. What he had seen the previous evening had incensed him. When he went home, hatred for Goma filled his heart. As a personal revenge, he decided to leak the secret he knew about her, the secret he had heard from his mother. For the fourth time that day, he went back to Goma's house. He met Amma at the gate. Has he come?" Anani asked. "Yes, just now. Did your mother do anything to him?" "No," she said. Amma hesitated and remained silent. What did she say?" "Well, it is all right, Anani. Adu is in his room." Amma didn't want to repeat what her mother had said, although she thought about it. The woman had told Adu that she didn't care if Adu died in the bush or if he stayed there till the next day. Amma went and joined the boys in Adu's room. Adu was eating boiled plantain and bean stew, the day's lunch that had been left over for him. He munched hungrily as he answered their questions about where he had been all day. He decided not to tell them anything about the grave thieves until he had informed Ofori about it. When he finished eating, Anani said, there's something I must tell you, Adu. Tell me. Anani looked at Amma, who looked back. From the way Anani watched her, she knew she wasn't welcome to listen to their conversation, but she still refused to leave. Amma had an itchy ear. Anani waited, but Amma sat down defiantly. Then he said, Amma, why don't you be a good girl? What? 2 minutes. Just excuse us for 2 minutes. Reluctantly, Amma rose to her feet, made an I will get you face at Anani and went out. When she went back to the room, she found the two boys sitting there looking so solemn that she was alarmed. What is it? Amma asked. Oh, nothing, Anani replied. Amma looked at Adu. By the way her friend was staring at her, she knew that whatever they had discussed concerned her. If not, why had they sent her away? Anani got up. Good night, he said. Tomorrow at school. When he left, Amma asked, What's wrong? Nothing. What did he tell you? Adu was silent. Please tell me. Her voice was pleading. I can't. Why not? Is it a secret? No, not a secret. But I can't. The way Adu said it made Amma suspicious. She tried to guess, but it was no use. Her curiosity grew. If it's not a secret, why won't you tell me? Adu was silent. Amma was his best friend. But what Anani had revealed to him was too shocking to be true. No, it can't be true, he said aloud. What? Amma asked quickly. Nothing. Amma didn't like that and said so. She wanted to add, Will you treat me this way, Adu? But she kept quiet instead. Adu was afraid he had hurt her, but he couldn't help it. He must think about this matter before telling Amma. That is, if he should tell her at all. Ofori looked at the boy sitting before him. He could see how sad and lonely he was. The swollen eyes told of tears. A child saddled with too much grief for his age. But even more disturbing just now was the story Adu had told him. In the last year, Adu had moved from primary into the middle school. The two school blocks stood side by side within the same compound. Although Adu now had a different teacher, Ofori to him was his teacher. It was Ofori who understood him and showed him that he loved him. He could tell the teacher anything he wanted, and the teacher listened to him. Are you sure that what you are telling me is true, Adu? It's true, sir. I heard them with my own ears, and even though it was dark, I could see their faces because of the torch they had. Ofori gazed at the boy in disbelief. His mind whirled to his colleague in the school. He had seen him teaching. He had seen him in the head teacher's house. He had seen him on the football field. Then he focused on Adu. And you say you saw teacher Ephraim. He was the one holding the torch, and he was the one who dug the place where he hid the tents. What about the other person? Have you seen him before? No, sir. I've never seen him before. The news was shocking to Ofori. The crime had already received wide publicity, not only in Buama, but even in the towns and villages in the district. In the primary school, the matter had been discussed at staff level. Some of the biggest boys, like Charlie, had been questioned about their activities in the town. This is serious, Adu. Ofori got up and paced the sitting room. The boy wiped his swollen lips on his shirt sleeves. Adu, Ofori turned back to him. Have you told anybody else about this? No, sir. Good. Let's go to the head teacher's house. Sir, there's something else I want to tell you. Okay, Ofori sat down. Adu told him about the dream. To him, it was obvious now who had killed his family. Wasn't it his aunt? And now she was after him. He could feel the spiritual battle now. Have you dreamt this way before? Ofori asked the shivering boy. Yes, sir. 2 years ago, just before my parents died. In that dream, the leopard almost got me. Ofori thought for some time. It's a spiritual battle, no doubt, he said. But don't. He hesitated. He wanted to dissuade the boy from calling his aunt a witch or associating her with the leopard in the dream, but he refrained from it. The devil, he knew, could use anybody who would let himself be used. What Adu had seen in his dream was not a mere imagination. He took his Bible and read the first letter of John. You, dear children, are from God and have overcome them, the evil spirits, because the one who is in you is greater than the one who is in the world. Ofori explained, there's a constant battle between the powers of darkness and the power of light. Only those who are in Christ win this battle. But, Adu asked, why was the leopard unable to approach Yarrow and me in the dream? Yarrow was a man of God. The leopard, the power of evil could not approach you because it saw the power that was in the man of God. The verse I've just read to you says that the one who is in the children of God, that is the Spirit of Christ, is greater than the one who is outside, the spirit of the devil. Ofori prayed for the boy, but Adu was scared. The truth of the struggle dawned on him only gradually. Why was he the target of this struggle? He asked himself. What wrong had he done? What wrong had he done? He still felt troubled even as they left for the head teacher's house. Motorway glared at the door for a long time. Seated in his living room were Ofori and Adu. They had just told him about Ephraim and the other thief. He pushed back his glasses and ran his palms across his bald head. Adu was sitting in the head teacher's living room for the first time. On the two walls opposite hung photographs of tractors plowing large fields of what he guessed to be rice, but which was actually wheat. The other picture was a poster of David killing Goliath, the giant. Yarrow had once told him the story. The picture showed giant Goliath, heavily armored but fallen, with little David swinging a sling, the type that his father used to drive birds away. Yarrow had told him how the stone from David's sling had made the giant's armor useless and added, David went to war against Goliath in the name of the living God and defeated him. No matter how small or big you are, you will win your battles if you battle in the name of the living God. Let's inform the chief about it, Ofori suggested. Motorway thought for some time and then said, isn't there a way to prevent this from public hearing? How could we do that? Ofori asked doubtfully. Supposing Motorway began, but saw Adu looking keenly at him and stopped. Adu, he addressed the weary boy. Take this chair and wait outside there. We shall call you later. Yes, sir. Adu took the chair and went out. The head teacher leaned forward and said quietly, it's important that he doesn't hear everything, Mr. Ofori. Yes. And what happened to his lips? He had a row with his aunt again. He has a problem at home. Ofori briefed him on Adu's relationship with his aunt. Poor boy. Now, as I was saying, suppose we contacted Ephraim himself to find out. I have thought about that, but what if he denies any knowledge of it? And he's sure to deny it, Ofori. You are right. If we succeed in settling this matter, I tell you, Ephraim will have to be transferred. Motorway was angry. He added, I suggest we inform the chief, then secretly keep watch over the spot until we can catch them red-handed. Otherwise, there is no way of making Ephraim and his friend admit the crime. All right, but first, we should go and check it ourselves. Minutes later, Motorway, Ofori and Adu were on their way to the stream. They went to the chief's linguist. He was dark and tall, with a mustache that made him look fierce. His heavy eyebrows and thick lips caused a chill within Adu. He wore a fading kente cloth, with the folds gathered upon his right shoulder, as he was a left-handed man. Left-handed people, it was said, were hot-tempered but cowards. This man was the opposite. He was known to be calm, patient, and courageous. Behind his ferocious appearance was a man of wisdom. People of Boama said he was the strongest man in the royal family and that he virtually ruled the land. People who wanted to talk to the chief must first talk to the linguist. Teachers were important people in Boama, looked upon with respect even by elders. The chief's linguist was happy to see the head teacher. What brings such honored men to us today? We have some important news for the chief. Motorway began, and we thought the sun should not go to sleep until the chief has heard it. People often came to the chief's linguist with trivial matters, some of which never reached the chief. He thought that he should perhaps listen to this one and quench it, as he had done so many matters. What is it? He asked. Motorway turned to Ofori and asked him to speak. Ofori began to tell Adu's story, how he went down to the stream in order to run away from his aunt, when Ofori said that Adu had seen where the thieves who broke into the royal grave had hidden their booty. The chief's linguist gave a shocked and excited shout. The theft had brought unwelcome attention to his position as a key man in the royal family, and there had been subtle criticism from those who wished his downfall. If he were able to catch the thieves and retrieve the missing things, he would not only consolidate his position and shame his enemies, but also win the chief's favor and the admiration of the people of Boama. Here then was Annie about to drip onto his tongue. He must open his mouth. Are you sure that what you are saying is true? He asked. It is, linguist, Motorway replied. We have gone to see the place where they buried the treasures. The linguist nodded calmly, hiding his inner excitement. He asked, do you know, head teacher, that rumors which stray into the chief's ears are punishable by a heavy fine if they are found to be false? I know, but we've been to the place, and the freshly dug earth is visible. Supposing we dig the place and find it to contain nothing, or something that has nothing to do with the stolen items. We've thought about that, linguist, Ofori replied. We suggest an ambush. People should be sent to watch the place. And if it takes a whole year before the thieves return for their things? They had not thought about that. Adu spoke out for the first time. I heard them say they will return for the items in 3 days' time to change their hiding place. The linguist appeared convinced. He agreed that he would provide men to keep watch that very night. But something else was worrying Motorway. He was about to speak when the linguist asked, shall I tell the chief about this? Ofori answered, we would rather you waited until the thieves are caught. All right, go and get ready. Be back here before sundown and take my men with you. May I say this, linguist? Asked Motorway. The question you asked a while ago about whether we knew what is buried is important. You are right. We cannot guarantee without doubt that the hole contains the items. We may catch them, but if the things they buried are not the chief's properties, what will happen? I've appreciated your efforts, my friends, the linguist said, rising up. If it all turns out to be false, since you said I should not inform the chief, I will treat it as nothing. We will forget about it. Thank you, Motorway said, relieved. Ofori was almost trotting. He was eager to get to Becky's house. The appointment had almost been ruined by the incident with Adu. He hoped that Becky would still be at home. When he got there, he decided to play a trick. He opened her door slowly without knocking. Becky was there, facing her open window. She heard the door open and did not turn to look. She knew who it was. She had seen him from the window. Ofori stood behind her for some time, expecting her to turn and look at him. But she didn't. Ofori took advantage of this to admire her. He was about to ask Becky to be his wife. Becky turned. Ofori had been smiling, but Becky looked serious. For a brief moment, the two lovers looked into each other's eyes. You did a good thing, Becky said, looking at Ofori with the same serious expression. We had a big matter that made me leave in a hurry, Ofori explained. I thought I would come soon. Oh, a big matter, I see. Then you should have told me yesterday when you asked me to wait for you that it wasn't to hear anything. That was a big matter. Her anger showed in her flashing eyes and in the tightness of her lips. It was to hear a big matter, Becky, Ofori said, approaching her. A matter bigger than you are prepared to hear. He held her by the waist and drew her close. Becky did not resist. I love you, Ofori said. Becky just looked at him. I said I love you. Becky remained silent. Then Ofori saw that her eyes were full of tears. Ofori took her in his arms. Becky, I love you and I want you to be my wife. Becky sighed. Gently, she unclasped his hands from around her hips and went to sit down. Ofori remained at the window, looking out. Sit down, Becky said. Ofori turned to look at her but kept standing by the window. Will you marry me? He asked. Where are you? We have a big case at hand. Becky, I was on my way here when Adu came to me, claiming that he saw two thieves last night, whom he thought were grave thieves. Really? Yes. And guess what? We went to the head teacher, and together we went to where Adu saw them bury the treasures. From there, we went to the chief linguist to report it. You did all that? Becky said slowly. Ofori nodded. I lost my temper. Becky spoke the words softly and slowly. I'm sorry. She fell silent. Becky, Ofori said again. I asked you if you would marry me. Ofori waited. Becky rose up slowly and went and stood by the window. There was a long pause. Becky said, Yes. She said it very softly, but Ofori heard it. The people of Boama were about to go to bed that night when an unusual noise was heard from the center of the town. The sound suggested that a mob had hurriedly been convened. Adu thought he knew what was happening. He rose up and went out. People were rushing from their houses towards the chief's palace. Adu followed them to the chief's compound, just in time to see teacher Ephraim and his colleague being shoved into the guard room. While people asked what was happening, Adu nodded and went back to the house. Everybody in Boama waited for the day of judgment with eagerness. The chief's courtroom was packed to capacity, with more people standing outside and craning their necks to catch a glimpse of Ephraim, the school teacher, and his friend. Both had done an abominable thing in Boama. Although the people had heard of graves being broken into, that was the news from distant lands. It did not happen here in Boama. This was the most grievous offense ever committed on their own soil. But many were disappointed. They were expecting a prolonged trial in which arguments would go back and forth to try to find out the details of the crime. But instead, the chief's linguist addressed the people in the chief's compound. Teacher Ephraim and his friend, he told them, had admitted their guilt. The chief and his elders had agreed to hand the matter over to the police. That was that. As the crowd dispersed to their homes and working places, some were indignant. They wanted to see the culprits punished according to the traditions of the people. They were sure the police would find a way of freeing the thieves. I will not be surprised, one elder said to another, if tomorrow we see those two men roaming about here as free men. The events of the past week plagued Adu's heart. Too many things were happening within a short time. What worried him most was the secret that Anani had told him about Amma. Every time he thought about it, he felt like crying. Ever since he looked at Amma with sorrowful eyes. Anani had told him not to inform her, but there was no way he could keep quiet. Yet he was scared of telling Amma. What would become of her if she got to know this? What would his aunt do? Perhaps she would kill him this time. Since Anani said it was his mother who had gossiped about it in his hearing, how would it affect the relationship between Mansa and his aunt? Now he began to understand why his aunt and Anani's mother were so close. They shared a big secret. Slowly he got up from behind the back corner of the house. He had been sitting there all evening since supper time, reflecting on these things. On his way to the house, he met Amma. Is that Adu? Amma called. Where have you been? Amma, Adu said. I've been looking for you. Come, there is something I have to tell you. They went back to the place where Adu had been sitting. Amma, Adu began. There's something I should tell you. I didn't want to tell you, but... He stopped. Is it something serious? Amma asked. Yes. Amma became more curious. What is it about? She asked. But Adu's courage failed him again. He could not reveal the secret after all. I'm sorry, Amma. Can I tell you tomorrow? I promise. Amma felt disappointed. She rose up and entered the house without saying a word to Adu. As soon as Amma went in, Guma knew something was wrong. "What is it?" she asked. Amma kept quiet. "I'm talking to you, Amma," Guma insisted. "What's the matter?" "Nothing, mother. I was just thinking." "Thinking about what?" Amma was silent. "Come here." Amma walked over to Guma. The woman coaxed her. "It's Adu," Amma finally said. "He said he had something to tell me, but he seems to be afraid to speak. He's making my heart beat." When the last words were out, she regretted it. This could get Adu into trouble. "Why did he refuse to tell you?" Guma asked Amma. "I don't know." At that moment, Adu came in. He was heading for his room when he heard his aunt call. "Come here, Adu." Adu went and stood before his aunt. "What is it you say you've got to tell Amma?" The question rocked him and his face showed it. This was the last thing he would have expected Amma and her mother to discuss. He quickly pulled a fast one on his aunt. "Aunt," he said, "it's about a test they did in class this week. I hear Amma scored the highest marks." Guma looked at her daughter's face to ascertain the truth. A faint smile came to Amma's face. Turning back to Adu, Guma said, "Then why didn't you tell her? Why did you make it seem as if it was something dreadful?" "It was dreadful," Adu thought, but he remained silent. "Go," Guma said. Adu walked away. If Goma was satisfied with the reply, Amma wasn't at all. It certainly was true that she had scored the highest marks in the geography test. But that was old news now, and anyway, she knew about it. She knew Adu had hidden the truth, and that made matters worse. Later, when Goma was busy with other things, Amma slipped into Adu's room. "Adu, why are you doing this to me?" "All right, Amma. This is final. I can't tell you tonight, but I promise to tell you tomorrow." Adu kept his promise. They were on their way to school in the morning when Adu said, "I don't know how you will take this, Amma, but they say," he hesitated, "they say my aunt is not your real mother." Amma's eyes flashed. She looked stupefied and stood rooted to the ground. Then, to Adu's surprise, her body relaxed and she laughed. For a moment, no one spoke. Amma searched Adu's eyes and the corners of his mouth to detect confirmation of the joke she had just heard. She found none. Immediately, her smile vanished and her body stiffened again. "What did you say, Adu?" "Anani told me. He said he overheard his mother and another woman discussing you and my aunt. He heard that you are not my aunt's real daughter." When later he asked his mother, Amma's body was shaking. The book she held dropped and scattered under her feet. Beads of sweat formed on her brow. Adu had mustered all his courage to reveal this, but now he stood there helpless. "Is it true, Adu?" The calmness of Amma's voice strangely contradicted her shaking body. "I hope it is not true, Amma." Amma looked away from Adu and stared with tear-filled eyes at the ground for a long time. Then slowly, forgetting her books and Adu, she returned back towards home. "Where are you going?" Adu called after her. She did not reply. Adu bent down to pick the books. When he looked up again, he saw Amma running towards home. He decided to follow her. He didn't regret revealing the secret to her. He didn't fear the consequences from his aunt. He had only one thought: to keep an eye on his friend Amma and to be near her. Amma ran as fast as she could, her heart pounding loudly. On the way, she changed her mind. She wouldn't go home yet. Instead, she dashed into Mansa's house without stopping at the gate and came face to face with the woman. Mansa was alarmed. She dropped the basket she was holding. "Amma," Mansa said and placed a hand upon Amma's shoulder. She saw that the girl was crying. "What's wrong, Amma? Is your mother at home?" Anani's mother, Amma began. She wiped her tears in order to see clearly. "Is it true?" She stopped. Mansa got the hint and began to panic. She was sure someone had broken the secret to Amma. "Is it true," Amma went on, "that my mother is not my real mother?" The woman betrayed herself by placing her palm on her wide open mouth. "Who told you?" Mansa asked, trying to compose herself, but it was too late. "So it's true," Amma yelled and began to cry aloud. Before Mansa could get hold of Amma, she was already gone. Mansa went back to her house shaking. She knew her son must have leaked the secret. He had been there when she had talked to the other woman about it. Or could it be the woman who had betrayed her this way? But at the same time, Mansa felt calm about it all. 10 times and more, she had suggested to Guma that she should tell Amma she was not her real mother, but Guma had always refused. Perhaps this was the only way Amma could know the truth about herself. When Amma got to the house, Guma was there. Amma stood close to her. She stared at Guma for a long time in a manner that both confused and alarmed the woman. In bewilderment, the two watched each other. Amma's body was still shaking. Her eyes were already red with tears. As Guma looked at her, she saw anger and something else she could not immediately identify. Softly, Guma said, "Amma." The girl did not reply. She looked at the woman sitting before her. At once, she realized that there was no resemblance between herself and the woman she had been calling mother. Physically, in character, and in temperament, they seemed to be miles apart. "Amma," Guma called again as she saw the girl's eyes sizing her up and down. She rose to her feet, but Amma turned away and began to cry. She cried so hard that Guma was confused. She forced the girl into her room and looked on helplessly as Amma threw herself about, refusing to be comforted. At that point, Adu arrived at the house. Quietly, he entered his room and locked the door. Then he listened. "Oh, mother, mother, mother," Amma cried. "I'm here, Amma. What's the matter?" Guma was disconcerted. "My mother, oh, where are you? Look at me, Amma. Are you sick? Can't you see me? What's wrong?" "My mother, I want my mother." "You are sick, Amma. What has gone wrong? Is your head aching? Let me give you some medicine." "I want my mother. My mother. Oh, mother. Where are you?" Then the reality hit Guma. Amma had heard something. She put back the tablet she was pouring from a small bottle and sat down. "Tell me what you are talking about, Amma. Look at me. I want my mother," Amma shouted, and Adu could detect a change in the voice that demanded her mother. He knew anger had replaced the weeping voice. "You want who?" Guma asked in shaking voice. Almost immediately, Adu could hear yet another voice. Amma spoke with a calm and composure that she sharply contrasted with the previous fretting. "Is it true that you are not my mother?" The question dropped like a steel upon the ground. Guma had no answer. Her 14-year-old secret was out, and she could keep it no longer. "Who told you?" Guma asked. "Is it true?" Amma demanded to know. Guma rose up, trembling. "So that was what Adu said he would tell you." "This has nothing to do with Adu," Amma shouted. "Go and ask Anane's mother." Then she broke down and wept bitterly. "That treacherous woman," Guma yelled. "I will teach her to keep her mouth shut." So saying, she stormed out of her room and headed for a friend's house. She soon returned. Mansa was not at home. Amma was still crying when Guma entered the room and closed the door behind her. "Amma, look here, Amma." The girl was so overtaken with grief. She turned to the only mother she had known. "Stop crying, Amma. I will explain all this to you." But Amma cried. "Why didn't you tell me?" "You don't understand, Amma. Listen to me." But Amma only cried harder. Adu, full of anger and indignation, tiptoed out of his room and left the house. The news flashed through the town. It was Goma again. That lovely girl she always called her daughter was not her real daughter. Amma had no parents. She too was an orphan, like Adu. The news kept spreading like bushfire in the Harmattan season. Soon, it became the talk of the town until various versions of the story were spread. Some said she had stolen the child from a hospital. Others claimed she had picked her up abandoned on an incinerator. And still others believed that, being a witch, she had confiscated the baby from other witches when they meant to kill her. In Buama, rumors often got out of hand. At school, Amma was bombarded with questions by her mates who wanted to confirm what they had heard. Was it true? They asked. Did she ever see her own mother? What did she look like? But Adu tried to protect Amma from the prying eyes and ears. He looked for her and prevented her from answering questions. One particular afternoon, they decided to miss the closing assembly to avoid the fuss. They walked home in silence. Adu looked at Amma from behind as she walked ahead of him. In 2 weeks that had passed, the girl had already lost a lot of weight. She had cried daily, often refusing to eat. Gomez's consolation and apologies had so far fallen on deaf ears. Many people, including Mansa, had tried to offer their own consolation, but Amma would not listen. She called all of them wicked for knowing her plight and yet failing to inform her. Her spirit was broken with dejection. Since Goma was not her mother, who was? As if in answer to the question, they heard the train hooting. It had just arrived at the station. Every time Adu heard the train passing by, he remembered the day he had waited for it to take his sorrows away. As he walked home with Amma that afternoon, he was unaware of a visitor who had just arrived on the train, a visitor whose presence in Buama would bring both pain and joy. Amma, Adu said, "You know I understand how you feel. I know it. Every time I think about all this, I remember what Yaro told me when my mother died. He didn't expect Amma to say anything. He told me that God was able to change bad situations to good ones. You know that I have not seen any good situations yet in all my troubles. But something about those words and the sincerity with which Yaro said them that day calms my heart every time I remember it. I don't understand it, but I keep remembering it. My friend said it was faith to believe what you could not see, and once you believe that God can turn bad things into good ones, it really happens." Amma only nodded. The two friends continued to walk in silence. Just at the entrance to their house, Adu saw someone he thought he recognized. He stopped. "Is that not Apia from Susa?" His face brightened up, surprised at what he saw. Running ahead of Amma, he soon got into the man who had already seen him and was waiting for him. "Hey, boy's father!" Adu exclaimed. "Adu," the man called. Adu ran and embraced Apia. Amma reached them with a forced smile upon her face. The sight of the man Adu often mentioned momentarily relieved the pain in her heart. She remembered the man vaguely from her visits to Susa 2 years ago. Apia told them he had come to Burma for a few days to transact a land issue. "I have been longing to see you, Adu," he said. "How are you?" "I'm fine, boy's father." "How is boy's mother and boy?" "Everyone is well and they send their greetings to you. I've just been talking with your mother, Amma, and she told me you were both in school." It was the biggest surprise of the day. They all went into the house. Goma was grateful to see Amma enter the house with the calmest face for many days. Soon, Adu and Apia were engaged in a conversation. Adu asked about Mahama and Yaro, his friends. "You did not hear about Mahama?" Apia asked the question in a way that shook Adu. "He went back home to his people in the north." That relieved Adu. He was not surprised that Mahama could not live in Susa after his beloved master and friend passed away. "Yaro is also gone," Apia announced. "Oh!" exclaimed Adu. Yaro always told him he would return home someday to become a pastor, but he missed his friend. As they talked, Apia watched Adu closely. He was shocked to see Adu reduced to skeleton. Apia longed to meet him alone to find out what he had been doing. Perhaps tomorrow they could talk privately. That evening after Apia had left, Adu began to recollect things about Susa. He wanted to cry, but he had long since learned to bite his lips. The next day, Apia had the chance he wanted. Adu visited him in his friend's house, and they talked for a very long time. Adu told Apia about everything he could remember. Now Apia understood why the boy looked the way he did. When Apia saw Adu, he remembered his father, Nimo. It is he who had saved Apia's wife years ago. Now he was looking for an opportunity to return this kindness. "Adu," he said, "I've been thinking. I want to ask you something. Do you think you could live with us in Susa?" This was unexpected. In all his hardships, the idea of going to live in Susa had never occurred to Adu. He had visited that tiny village of his birth 1,000 times, but only in his mind. Although he certainly missed the place, the people, the farms, the trees, and the houses, he had never thought about going back to Susa. The idea was welcome. Yes, wouldn't that move him from his aunt? While he thought about this, he realized why the idea had never occurred to him before. His aunt would never let him go. If you want, Adu, my wife and I will take care of you. Boy, your friend is there, and you could continue at your former school. Your father was so kind to me, and although he is not here today, Apia realized he ought not to have delved into that subject so carelessly. Adu was sobbing. Now he waited for Adu to settle. While he waited, he remembered that he must not make Adu feel the reason he wanted to adopt him was in return for his father's kindness. If he did, he knew the idea would be ruined forever. Adu would never go with him on that basis. It's okay, Adu. You are not alone. Will you come with me? Adu wiped his eyes and was soon composed. But my aunt will not agree, he replied. If Apia did not believe Adu, he soon found out for himself when he approached Guma with the matter later. You don't know what you are talking about, Apia, Guma shouted. Apia was very surprised because no woman had ever talked to him the way Guma did. But he was patient. You don't know what you are talking about, Guma repeated. When you insist on taking Adu away, what are you trying to tell me? Do you want to say that you can look after my brother's son better than I can? No, that's not the idea. If that's not the idea, then what is the idea? I'm just trying to show my appreciation of Nimo's kindness towards me. That's all. That's what I don't understand. If you really mean what you are saying, then I would have expected you to bring a bag full of money, not to take him away. Or do you think the bag of cocoyam you brought gives you the boldness to want to take him away? Apia was quiet. He realized it was useless arguing with the woman. That's the way some people create enmity among themselves. Guma continued. I don't want any trouble, Apia. Apia went away disappointed. Maybe he should forget the matter, he thought sadly. The rumor circulating in Boama about Ama reached Apia. He asked Adu. It's true, Adu said and filled in the gaps for Apia, who listened with interest. While Adu narrated the story, Apia was thinking hard. Adu stopped at a point and looked at Apia. The man was far away. Why, boy's father? Is it something? Wait a minute, Adu. Who first leaked this story? The mother of a friend of mine. The woman's name is Mansa. Why? Have you looked at Ama carefully? Yes. Do you know that she doesn't resemble your aunt in any way? Yes. Apia sat pensively for some time. How old is Ama? He asked. She's 13. I'm a year older than her. Apia made a mental calculation. His face lit up. Do you know our landlord very well? Which landlord? Yeboah, the landlord of our village back home. Did you see him many times before you came here? Yes, Adu recollected him very well, but he sought in vain for an answer to the puzzle. Was Apia trying to reveal something? Adu asked. Do you think the landlord knew something about this? In answer, Apia said, let's look for the woman Mansa. Ama, listen to me, said Adu. There's something I have to tell you. Perhaps this news may be better. Ama sniffed and wiped her nose like a little child. Adu couldn't wait to tell her what he and Apia had found out from Mansa. I know who your father is. Huh? Yes. Boy's father and I went to Anani's mother's place and she told us something interesting. I know your father and you have seen him before. He's a nice man. Ama looked at Adu. Was she supposed to believe this? Did you say you have seen him before? Yes, and you have seen him too. In fact, you've shaken hands with him. He is the landlord of Susa, our village. Is this true, Adu? Adu was silent. He was still trying to piece fragments of past events together. Now he looked at Ama and said, I want to believe that it is true. I will ask my mother, Ama said, and got up. Your mother? Adu began and stopped. Ama left him there and entered the house. She called her mother. That was when Adu knew Ama was going to be deeply disturbed in tearing herself away from the woman she had known as her mother since birth. Adu knew that once again, He had started a rule between mother and daughter. Guma sat on a stool in her bedroom. Amma sat in front of her. Sadness filled Guma's heart. After keeping the secret so long, she now had the opportunity to reveal the past to Amma. It was a past she would have liked to forget forever. As she thought, she wondered whether to tell her everything. Would Amma understand the craving in her heart that had driven her to do what she did? Would Amma appreciate the years that she had loved and cared for her, the years of pampering as an only child? Would Amma really understand that she would probably be dead had she not taken her away? Maybe she would understand, Guma decided. Maybe she would. Whatever the result, she felt she owed Amma an explanation. Moreover, if she, Guma, did not tell her everything, then someone else was sure to do it. The scene of the accident came to her vividly, as if it were only yesterday. Guma and her friend Mansa had been traveling together when the accident occurred. As sellers of beads and traditional bangles, they had traveled a lot. Those were the days when women traveled far and wide to sell their beads. When trade was good, they would go away for several days, spending their nights in villages and towns. It was a tedious job, but very lucrative. Guma and her friend were not the only ones to do this kind of job. It was common among women who considered themselves strong and able to undergo the strains of constant travel. On this particular trip, Guma and Mansa didn't intend to go that far. They were visiting only nearby towns like Kube, Abenase, Duampompo, Mange, and Brobe to collect their monies from debtors. But something happened that changed their plans. They were on their way from Kube to Abenase. As the two friends chatted, Mansa kept complaining about her naughty children and how she hoped they would not grow worse while she was away. She had left them in charge of her busy husband and her younger sister, who was staying with the family. Any talk about children touched a raw nerve in Guma. War raged within her as she brooded over her childlessness. She had often lamented to Mansa that if she had even one child, she would be happy. And one of the reasons for her travels was the hope of finding medicine men who might help her have a child. Most of the money Guma got from trading went to pay for medicines and medicine men. On this particular day, Guma was once again assailed by the strong desire for children. Guma and her friend were sitting at the back of the bus. At the front, a man stood up to sell his local medicine, which he said could cure all diseases. Guma didn't see him. She was looking at a woman who sat in front just behind the driver. This woman held a 2-month-old baby in her arms and was breastfeeding it. Guma wished 1,000 times that she was this lucky mother. She knew the mother all right. The woman was Susa, the wife of Yeboah, the landlord of the village, where her brother Animo lived. Guma had not known she was there until the bus left the station. She would greet her when they reached Abenase. The accident occurred suddenly. The driver was negotiating a sharp curve when the vehicle skidded off the road and somersaulted a number of times before landing in a deep ditch. The screams of the dying and the wounded filled the air. Some people had been thrown out of the vehicle alive and unscattered. Guma and her friend Mansa were among the lucky ones. Guma was actually beginning to run away from the scene of the accident when a sight wiped all the confusion out of her and brought her to a standstill. Lying on a thicket of thistles was a tiny baby who had also been thrown out of the vehicle. It was alive. The baby was the child of Susa. Guma looked around and discovered the baby's mother under the wreck. She was dead. When Guma picked the baby up and placed it upon her chest, she had no evil intent. She wanted to help a tiny child, but when the child cried, the old longing grew in Guma's heart. A weird idea exploded into her mind. This baby is mine. My baby, stop crying, baby. When she discovered that this was a baby girl, she immediately called her Amma. Stop crying, Amma. So Guma had a baby. My friend, are you alive? The voice came from behind Guma, who turned to see Mansa rushing from the scene of the accident. Yes, I'm alive. And look at this baby, my friend. She stared hard at Mansa, who seemed to understand the woman's intentions. Let me take her away, my friend. Her mother is dead. Mansa didn't look as though she liked the idea, But before she could say anything, a vehicle came to pick up some of the victims. Guma and the baby and Mansa were taken to the hospital at Kubi. Just a few minutes later, Guma and her friends sneaked out of the hospital. They found a place in a public park where they hatched a neat plan. "Help me, Mansa," Guma cried. "This is my only chance." She was desperate. Mansa raised an objection, but as Guma pleaded, she relented. Sympathy overrode reasoning and blinded them to any consequences. "I will help you," Mansa assured her friend. "What shall we do?" Ideas came to Goma in a flash. "I will take the child to the north, where nobody knows me." It seemed a good idea to Mansa, but she asked, "What explanation shall we give to people?" People were not Goma's biggest concern, and she told Mansa so. People? Weren't those people the very ones who mocked her and called her barren, and other insulting names for being childless? "Forget about people," Goma told Mansa. "Whatever you do, people will always talk about you. Let me do what will be best for me and my child." But Mansa insisted that if Goma really wanted to keep the child, she must concern herself with what people might say. And so they made a plan that enabled Goma to keep her secret. Goma and Mansa abandoned their trips to the south and went all the way to Salaga in the north. They rented a room in a quiet suburb. 2 days later, Goma left the child in the care of Mansa and returned to Boama, where she reported that she and Mansa had parted company in one of the towns, as they sometimes did when they were unable to sell their goods. Mansa would be away for 5 days. Goma's biggest task at this point was to convince her husband. She told him everything. "We must take this child. Her mother died in an accident, and this child was going to die anyway. This is our chance to stop people from insulting us in public." "Are you sure we must do this?" her husband had asked, terrified that his wife could think up such an idea. But Goma was a strong woman. She knew how to get what she wanted. She made the man understand that what she was doing was in the best interest of both of them. She even added that if she got the child, people would stop thinking he was impotent, as some had indeed said. Did her husband want to continue to be a laughingstock in the eyes of the people of Boama? "How can this be done?" the man then asked. "Nobody has seen you pregnant." Goma unveiled the plan which Mansa helped her to construct. Goma and her husband would go away on a transfer to the north for 3 years. By the time they returned, the child would just be over 3 years old. "The child will look older than the age we say she is," Goma pointed out. "But that will be alright. Nobody is likely to ask silly questions about her age." Goma continued her story. The very next day, she told a few people that she and her husband had decided to travel out of Boama for a while. She went ahead to Salaga in the north, allowing her husband time to force a transfer from his workplace. Mansa returned to Boama later and kept her mouth shut about the entire plan. Goma compelled her to accept a piece of her land as a gift to buy her silence. 3 years later, when Goma and her husband returned to Boama, people congratulated them for their child. They made no fuss about Ama's age. Only her brother Nimo called her to the village and reprimanded her for going away without his knowledge. "It worked, Ama," Goma told the girl who sat before her, whose life story she was revealing. She said all this so freely. It was as if she were telling somebody else's story. "It worked," she repeated. Then she added, "So Ama, you are really 14 years old, not 13. You were born in the same year as Adu." All the time Goma spoke, Ama was crying, but Goma did not stop. The girl deserved the full story. When Goma mentioned that Ama was the same age as Adu, she looked up. Goma expected her to say something, but Ama kept quiet. Slowly, the girl rose to her feet and left the room. No one knew when Apia left Boama, but when he returned a few days later, it was obvious where he had been, for he came with Yabua. His visit to Mansa had convinced him that the story was true. To Apia, no honor could be higher than to be the first man to tell the landlord that his long-lost daughter was alive. His main task was to make the landlord believe him. Yabua rushed to Boama with Apia in disbelief. Can it be true? He kept asking Apia and himself. Doubts, excitement, and even sorrow crisscrossed his mind. That his daughter should be alive only reminded him of his wife Susa. "What's coming upon me?" he asked himself. Overpresumption even nudged him to entertain a faint hope that possibly Susa could be alive somewhere in this world. In Boawa, he couldn't wait to see the girl Ama. The opportunity came that same evening. Apia accompanied Yabua and two of his friends to Gomez's house. The moment Yabua entered the house, something seemed terribly wrong. The air was charged with a strange feeling, as if the whole thing was false. A girl came out of Gomez's room and stood still upon seeing him. Yabua also stopped. For the first time, Yabua looked at the girl. He saw certain physical features which he quickly attributed to Susa, his wife. For a moment, he felt like dashing forward to hug his daughter, but the girl turned away and re-entered the room. Yabua and his companions stood by while Ama informed Goma that some visitors had come to the house. When Goma came out and saw Yabua, her first reaction was to retreat, as she always did whenever she came face to face with him. But now everything was different. There was nothing to hide. She stepped forward and said straight out, "Please, sit down." Yabua and the visitors sat down, but before they said anything, Goma continued, "I know why you came. Everything is now over, but we can talk here. Call me in the chief's house." Yabua heard it, but kept glancing at Ama, who was standing at the doorway to Gomez's room. When they went away, Yabua had the face of his daughter engraved in his mind. Just like Susa, her mother, he muttered, "Just like her." He was elated, but somewhere deep within, he felt hidden sorrow reviving. "I've already told the chief and the elders here that I didn't give birth to the girl," Goma addressed the chief's linguist. She had been asked to tell the story of how she had salvaged the tiny baby. In the silence of the palace before the chief's council of elders, Goma narrated the pathetic scenes again. The elders ruled that since they had heard from Gomez's own lips that the girl was not her daughter, there was no case. Ama should go to her father. "I know that," Goma replied, "but I'm reminding the elders that I saved the girl from death. She would surely have died if I hadn't taken her. For 14 years, I cared for her as my own daughter, provided her with everything she needed, took her to school. Ama lacked nothing in the house." "Let this woman know, elders," Yabua said, "that my family and I highly appreciate what she had done. If she demands to be paid for," Goma cut in, "I was not requesting to be paid. My request is this. Ama is grown. She's not a child any longer. Let the elders call her and find out where she would like to live, with Yabua or with me." That request made Yabua angry. "Did you ever hear this before, elders? There's no way the girl is going to remain with her. 14 years of agony is enough for me. Too much thinking about how that little child vanished was sending me mad. Don't you think I can hold you for—" He stopped. "For what?" Goma asked, anger welling up in her. "How do we know that you didn't do something to my wife in order to have the child?" No, the chief cut in. "Don't go that far, Yabua." The old painful agony was threatening to reawaken, and Yabua would be glad not to relive it all over again. "We cannot give the girl any option to choose between you and her father," the chief continued. "You did well to tell us all about the girl and to admit that Yabua is her father. You could have concealed the truth till the end of the world." Goma bit her lips. Indeed, she could. Having met his own daughter, the chief went on, "Yabua, who has not shown any reason why he cannot take care of her, will take her with him." That was the chief's verdict, and it was final. The matter would have ended there, but Goma stood up and said, "And suppose Ama refuses to go with him?" "If the girl says this," the chief replied, "bring the matter back to this court." That was the final word. "Ama, you are my daughter." The girl gazed at the man who held the hand. Was this her father? So this landlord Yabua was her father. And why had all this been hidden from her until now? When they asked her where she would like to be, with Yabua or with Goma, Ama had chosen to go with Yabua, since Goma was not her mother. But now, how could she tear herself away from Goma and go with this man whom she knew almost nothing about? If all this was true, that meant she had no mother. Yabua watched the girl sitting before him and knew her mind was far away. "You are not listening, Ama. I'm your father. I'm sorry about what happened to you. You will come home with me. and everything will be all right. If she had no mother, then who was this woman that she was going to live with as a stepmother? Would she treat her like Guma treated Adu? She had been told that Yebua had other children. How would those younger brothers and sisters regard her? Ama, Yebua called and gently pressed her hand. Ama came to and peered at her father. "You look afraid," observed Yebua. Ama nodded. Yebua pressed her to him and tried to reassure her. "You will come with me, won't you?" Ama nodded. Through a maze of disturbing thoughts, she raised her eyes for the first time and asked, "How about Adu?" "What about him? What will happen to him?" Ama asked. Then she said, "Mother is very wicked to him." Yebua wanted to shout, "Guma is not your mother," but he held back. He knew it would take some time for Ama to get used to her new state. "I asked Adu if he would like to come with me, but he said Apia wants to take him to the village." "No," said Ama firmly. "Adu must come with us." Her own fear of going to the new house would lessen if Adu went with them. Adu was a close friend, and he was an orphan, almost like herself. They needed one another for encouragement and support. Adu had always expressed the desire to get away from his aunt. Here was the opportunity. His father was a friend, the hardest worker in the village. "I'd be glad if Adu would come with us." "I will talk to him," Ama said. She found Adu at home. He looked at her shyly. "Here you are, Ama. I've been wondering where you were. Will you follow your father?" "Yes, and he wants you to come with us." "Please, Adu, come with us. It would be good for us to go together. You know I don't know anybody there." Adu bowed. "Why, Adu?" How was Adu going to tell Ama that he had chosen to go with Apia back to the village, Susa, where he was born and bred? Going back seemed the natural thing to do. Moreover, his heart was in Susa, where he would live in familiar places again, close to his family. Ama wanted to cry, but Adu tried to explain to her why it was necessary for him to go back to Susa. "It's only for a while, Ama. Once we get settled, I will visit you often." Ama began to cry. Suddenly, she stood alone. Once, she had been a happy girl living with her mother. Now, she was thrown out like a fish on the dry land. She was being led away by a man who was her father, but whom she knew nothing about, to a town that she had never seen, into a family that was stranger to her, to face a baffling future. Yet all these would have been a little beautiful if Adu had gone with her. But even Adu, the boy she was going to love, was vanishing from her life. She had been sharing his lonely life, his pain, his sorrows, his future, but now there seemed nothing to share anymore. Was their time meant to end this way? Adu walked fast. He was going to Teacher Ofori's house. News about the teacher's transfer from Buama was on everybody's lips. The news came to Adu like a jab in his stomach. If Teacher Ofori was going away from Buama, his own days in the town were numbered, whether his aunt allowed him to go with Apia or not. He saw in the teacher his father and mother and certain aspects of Yaro. If Ofori was leaving Buama, then his own life must change. A way must be found to make this aunt release him. He must not be left alone when Ofori and Ama were going away. He knocked on the door. "Come in," Ofori called. Adu walked in. Becky was there, busily addressing many envelopes. "Hey Adu, you heard the news," Ofori said. "Sir, they say you are going." "Yes, Adu. Your friend and teacher is going." Ofori didn't expect what followed. Without being told, Adu sat on a chair and began to cry. He did it so suddenly and sobbed so hard that tears stood in Becky's eyes. She left the envelopes and placed her hands on Adu's shoulder. The touch seemed to make things worse. Adu's body shook. "Stop crying, Adu." Becky tried to console him. "It's painful for all of us. Is there something we can do for you before we say goodbye?" It was bad for Adu and also for Ofori and his fiancée. Ofori felt sorry for Adu. The boy was like a younger brother to him. Now as the boy cried, Ofori's own heart broke. Adu had had his full share of grief. He began to see his departure as a harder blow to Adu than to the other pupils. Adu didn't get on with his aunt. He was always on the losing side. Sometimes Ofori had feared for him. But how could he help this boy? Perhaps he had already been doing it here in Buama, but simply being around to listen to him and to direct his life was not enough. Now that he was being transferred, what would he do? We've been thinking about you, Edu, Ofori said. You know your friend Amma is going away with her father. Adu nodded and wiped his nose. We thought her father would take you with him. It would be lovely, Adu, Becky said. You'd be close to your friend Amma. Ofori and Becky had discussed this, but they were not sure whether Yeboah had thought of it. Amma and her father want me to go with them, Adu replied. But, he paused. Then he looked at Ofori and added, I don't want to go with them. The surprise on Ofori's face spoke for him. Adu explained, I'm going to miss Amma too much, and I wish I could go with her. But teacher, I don't know her father very well, and I don't know his town. My father told me a story about him, how his wife, Amma's real mother, died, and what happened before he married again. Amma herself is not sure how life is going to be for her. I don't know, he paused. If it were possible, I would rather go back to the village, Adu said with a tinge of helplessness at the end. Back to the village? Becky asked. Yes, there is a man who has come from Susa. He was one of my father's friends, and his wife and my mother were best friends. He came to see a friend here. It seemed to Ofori and Becky that Adu was about to tell them something, and they listened keenly. Adu continued. When I told him about all that I've gone through, he asked me if I wanted to go back to Susa and live with him. Ofori looked at Becky and they both nodded. All at once, this appeared to be the solution to Adu's predicament. It was certain Adu would find no happiness with his aunt. Going away with Amma and her father would have been a fine option if Adu had no objections. But if his own choice was to go with his father's friend back to the village where he was born and raised, they would give him their support. But my aunt has refused to let me go with him. She said I would leave the house only if she was dead. Ofori knew Gomer's power over Adu. She could wedge herself between Adu and progress unless she was restrained. He felt strongly that Gomer, having abused a simple trust to protect the dignity of her own brother's son, had also lost the privilege that went with this responsibility, the privilege of exercising authority over another human being. He saw Gomer's threat to keep the boy against his will as undeserved. These thoughts reminded him of something he had been withholding from Adu. He must tell him now. Adu, he said, the chief has been thinking about you. As far as Adu was concerned, the sooner the case was over, the better. People congratulated him for his heroic deed in retrieving the chief's treasure, but the weight of having brought two people to prison was heavy on him. The chief is thinking of rewarding you, Adu, Ofori informed him. He asked me if there was anything you want him to do for you. Adu smiled. Can he help me to go away from my aunt and follow Apia back to Susa? Yes, said Ofori, I think so. I will ask the linguist about this. When I left her, Amma was crying. She's been crying since she heard that my aunt is not her real mother. Naturally, Adu, Becky said. She had been placed in a difficult situation. I feel for the girl. I don't know what she will do. Would it be alright for the chief to let us both go to Susa with Apia? This unexpected request threw Ofori and Becky off balance for a while. It was Becky who spoke. It's a delicate issue, I think. Besides, do you think Amma will like Susa in the way you do? She has lived with your aunt for 14 years here in Boama. She scarcely knows Susa the way you do. You were born and brought up there until 2 years ago. Well, I don't know. This is a sad matter. Ofori let out his feelings. It's so unfair for one person to throw two young lives into this chaos. After a pause, he continued. Becky is right, Adu, but I will mention it to the chief's linguist. When Adu left, Ofori and Becky talked about the boy. Earlier on, the two of them had agreed that they would adopt Adu if need be. But now that an old friend was going to take him to his home village, they decided to drop their plans. That day, Ofori went to see the chief's linguist. There's something that the boy wants, Ofori began. If the chief would step in, he would be very happy. What is it? Ofori told him about Apia. The linguist had already been informed about Adu. The chief himself knew all this. Has the boy expressed the desire to go back to the village? The linguist asked Ofori. Yes, he said he would prefer that to the situation he is in. The linguist thought for a moment and then said, I will tell the chief about it. The boy had done a lot for us, and if this is what he wants, he will get it. Adu's last day in Boama was a mixture of grief and relief. Apia and Yeboah purposely arranged for Adu and Ama to leave the town on the same day. Adu to the village and Ama to her father's home. Everything was set for Adu's departure to Susa, the village of his birth. The chief had not only prevailed over his aunt to release him, but had also bought him presents to take with him. It was a Saturday morning, and Adu was on his way to Ofori's house. The school had organized a special farewell meeting for him and Ama the previous evening. But Adu also desired a closer farewell with Ofori and Becky. He would soon see Susa again, the village he was so sure he could never tear away from his memory. This, coupled with the thought of leaving his aunt, brought him the relief he dreamt of. Ofori was at home. One look and Adu could tell that his teacher was also getting ready to leave Wama. There were books and old packing cases in the yard. Adu, Ofori called when he came out. He saw his young friend wearing a new shirt and shorts with sandals to match, some of the items the chief had bought for him. "You look handsome, my boy. Don't say you are already on your way." Ofori tried to sound as informal as possible to relieve the tension he could sense in the boy, but he knew that it was going to be a hard departure. Becky came out of the house and saw Adu. One look at him and her heart sank. Even though things seemed to be working out well for him, she could still see a very lonely boy. "So," Ofori started, "are you ready?" "I'm ready, sir. I just came to say goodbye." That was all his heart needed in order to pour out the tears he was suppressing. Adu tried to hold them back, but they flowed stubbornly. Becky could not hold back her own tears. "Don't worry, Adu," Ofori said. "We shall meet again. When you go, try to be a good boy. Don't let anybody find fault with you. Be obedient to your new parents and the people of the village. At school, respect your teachers and work hard. You remember the story of David Livingstone from your reading book, don't you?" Ofori began to quote. Although his father and mother were poor, he worked hard at his books and became a doctor. This was a direct quotation from a history book he often read with his pupils. Adu listened with his head bowed. "Never forget what your friend Yaro taught you. You will find him in the village, and if you do..." Adu shook his head. "My father's friend told me Yaro has left the village now." "I see. But I know the things he taught you about God still remain in you, because you often told me about him. Remember them. Don't forget what you've learned here also about the faith in God." Adu nodded. On impulse, Ofori added, "As you know, Becky and I have been transferred together. In 3 months' time, we shall be married." He paused to look at Becky. Adu followed his gaze. All three smiled. "In 3 days' time, we shall leave Boama for good. Adu, in case of any difficulty, let us know. Becky and I are willing to help you. Do you understand?" "Yes, thank you." "Here is our address," Becky said, giving Adu a piece of paper. Ofori added, "Don't fail to write to us and tell us how life is treating you in Susa." Adu took the paper and wiped away his tears. He lifted his head and looked at the faces of Ofori and Becky. He saw husband and wife. Surprisingly, he smiled. Ofori and Becky smiled too. They each embraced the boy, and the goodbye was complete. "We will be at the train station to see you off, Adu," Becky said as they led him outside. Adu nodded. Ofori and Becky stood there watching as the boy walked slowly away from them. Then they saw him raise the sleeves of his shirt to wipe his tears. Adu turned and saw Ofori and Becky standing where he had left them. They waved at him, and he waved back. When Adu got home, he hastened to his room to complete the packing of his few belongings. But to his surprise, it was done. He saw the bag containing his clothes and other personal effects, and a carton that held books and other things. His mattress bed was bare, and the pictures on the wall were gone. Even his machete was not in the corner where he normally left it. He saw it sticking out of the carton. He knew it was Amma who had completed the packing for him. He was still looking around his empty room when Amma walked in. "Where were you?" Amma asked. "I went to say goodbye to Teacher Ofori. You packed these things here?" "Yes. Thanks, Amma." They were silent for some time. Then Amma said casually, So you are going, Adu. Adu looked at his friend. He had no words with which to say anything. Will you remember me, Adu? Amma asked. I cannot forget you, Amma. I couldn't have survived in this place without you. They were standing face to face. Tears stood in their eyes, but they held back from crying. They had cried too much already. But overcome by grief, they began to cry silently. They tried to stifle their sobs, but that only kept them crying. Suddenly, they fell into each other's arms in a long hug. Then they sat down to console one another. That moment, Yebo and Apia arrived. Goma was in the compound, but after the men had greeted her, she entered her room. Are you ready, children? Asked Apia at the doorway. Adu answered for both of them. They were ready. In the compound, Amma hesitated. She looked at Goma's door, which was open. She put down her bag and entered the room. Goma was lost in thought on his stool. Amma stood there for some time and then said softly, We are going. Goma didn't respond. We are going, Amma repeated. Goma looked up and nodded. Then she rested her head in her palm. Amma saw for the first time that Goma's eyes were wet. That moment, Amma felt sorry for her. She was still standing there when a hand fell gently on her shoulder. She turned round and saw Yeboah. Let's go, he said. They all left for the train station, where many people had come to see them off. Teacher Ofori and Becky were already there. Anani had helped to take their luggage to the station. It took a little time for Adu's train to arrive. When it did, he detached himself from his friends and took his seat beside Apia in the coach. Amma and her father had to wait for their train to arrive. Some of the people were waving as Adu's train crawled out of the station. Others stood still. Adu searched for Amma and saw her father holding her hands. He waited for her to turn and wave, but she didn't. The train pulled out of the station and soon all the people were far away. The train pulled up at Susa about an hour later. There was the village again. Adu looked through the window and saw Susa train station and people waiting patiently on the platform. Memories began to unfold in his mind as the train came to a stop. He got up and took Apia's bag as well as his own things. Give me this and take the 2 bags, Apia said, taking the carton from him. When they got down, Adu saw someone running towards them. He looked carefully. Yes, it was Boy, his old friend. Boy himself had not seen Adu. When he did, he was amazed and stood still to make sure his eyes were not deceiving him. Suddenly, he shouted, Hey, Adu! Adu! The 2 friends embraced. Adu! Boy was not yet over his surprise. This is like a dream. It's a dream, Boy, Adu said, and the 2 boys laughed so loudly their happiness infected those who watched. Father, what kind of trick is this? Boy turned to his father. You were going to bring Adu and you didn't even tell us. Apia only laughed. He was glad about the unexpected reception for Adu. He was glad to see the boys laughing and talking excitedly. When they reached Susa, Adu was surprised. It looked smaller than he remembered. There was the house he and his parents had lived in only 2 years ago. Memories rushed through his mind and settled upon his heart. He quickly ignored his pounding heart and parched tongue and began to look around him. Boy was already ahead of him. He entered his house before Adu and Apia. Someone appeared at the entrance. It was Boy's mother. The woman ran towards her husband and the boy who followed him. Ignoring Apia, she embraced Adu with a cry of surprise. Adu, my son, Adu. Boy's mother hugged Adu and lifted him high. Adu was overwhelmed with a mixture of joy and grief. He looked at the woman who had just called him son. She hadn't changed at all. She was still Boy's mother, the woman he knew. The woman was quick to notice that Adu had grown thinner in the last 2 years. The little commotion attracted other people. They flocked to see Adu in Apia's house. They came in to sit and to chat. They asked Adu about Boama, about life there and about his aunt. They asked him about school and his friends. The rest of that day was spent talking and greeting. Everybody was surprised to see Adu once more. Before Adu had time to go out of the house again, it was already dark, save for the moon that roamed in the trees. He stood at the entrance of the house and studied the moon. Did that also remind him of long ago? Didn't it remind him of the time when his mother told them about the stories? Under the full moon, Susa used not to be as quiet on this night. In those days, he recalled, boys and girls played all kinds of games in the moonlight. He was still reliving those days when Boy found him outside. Boy, Adu spoke out his mind. Tell me, why is this village so quiet on a night like this when the moon is so bright? Ah, Adu, Boy answered. Things have changed. Susa is no longer what it used to be. All the friends we used to play with are gone. Two families moved away only last month. Do you still go bird hunting? Adu asked. Sometimes, but not as we used to do, Adu. Things have changed, but now that you've come, well, maybe we'll do as we used to. That was not good. That night, Adu's mind was more in Boama than it was in Susa. The next day, Adu had the opportunity to look around the village. Apia had gone to town to contact the school's authorities about Adu's return. If everything was alright, he would continue with schooling immediately. But as Adu went out, something told him a mistake had been made somewhere. The final blow came when he decided to go to his family's house. As soon as he entered, he was hit by memories. There was nobody in the house. The family that had shared the big compound house had moved away a long time ago, he was told. Since then, nobody had the courage to move in. As he watched his father's door, he had a feeling it would open. There was his mother's room. It was locked. He could hear mice chasing each other in the room and dropping things from the ceiling. The house was deserted. Mohammed's door was open and he felt like entering. He resisted the urge and simply stood there surveying one place after another. His father used to sharpen his machete here. There was the shed where he kept the rice and the maize. The kitchen was also open. He could almost see his mother and Nya preparing meals. After that, they would sit down and eat and listen to stories. Adu didn't know what he was doing to himself until he turned to go. The very act of going revived his thoughts. It was as though he was turning away from his parents. It was as if they were alive and only he was dead. He found himself unable to leave, even though he had been in that house for over 2 hours. He turned back and sat on a stone close to his mother's room. He pictured his family going about in the same house where he sat now. He rested his head on his knees and the tears fell. Soon, his whole body was racked with sobs which he did not try to control. Where is Adu? Boy's mother asked her son. He had no answer. I thought you went out with him. No, I was in the room. I didn't know he went out. The woman had suspected it all the time. The night before, when her husband arrived with Adu, she had spent a long time thinking about the best way to keep the boy's mind off his grief. Susa was the wrong place for him. It was unfortunate that Adu had suffered at the hands of his aunt, but Susa was no substitute for Boama. The memories were too fresh and the events too close to keep his mind at peace. If it was hard for the adults, how did her husband think it would work for the poor child? The only thing in favor of his coming back to Susa was the poor treatment he had received at the hands of his aunt. But for that, she reasoned, it would be better for the boy to be away from this place. But she kept these thoughts private. She vowed to do everything in her power to make the boy happy. Boy's mother knew where to check first for Adu. She went to the family's house and found Adu crying out his heart right by his mother's door. The sight saddened her so much that, before she knew it, she was crying with the grieving child. Adu, it's hard. Adu, it's all right. Let's go home. They went home. Adu began to understand why he had never felt the urge to return to this place. It was a place best to be visited with the mind, not in person. When Apia returned from town, his wife told him about the incident and added a piece of her mind. Apia called Adu to his room and told him, "It is only because you've just arrived, Adu. If you try to overcome the initial problem, you will soon discover that you can stay here. Try, Adu. I know how you feel. Only try your best." Adu said he would. "Would you like to go back to your aunt?" "No," he replied sharply. "So then, try and live with us. My family will take care of you, and so you have nothing to fear." But Adu had already made up his mind. That very night, he called his friend Boy outside and revealed his plan to him. "I must go away, Boy." "You must go away," Boy's reply showed his surprise. "Yes." "Why? You just arrived." "I know, boy, but I can't live in this place." Quickly, he added, "I want you to do something for me, boy." "But this doesn't sound nice, Adu. Why not wait for some days? I'm sure things will improve." "You don't understand, boy. It will not work. I've thought about this very much. Please, just do this one thing for me. Sometime tomorrow morning, I'll leave. When I'm gone, please tell your father and mother." "Where are you going?" "I'm sorry, I can't tell you now, boy, but later you will know. Please, just tell them I'm gone. I will be alive and well. Tell them I certainly do appreciate their kindness. I'm sorry for this, but it is for the best. Boy, I can't live here anymore." The whole plan tasted sour in Boy's mouth, and he told Adu so, but he promised to do as he requested. The day broke slowly, almost too slowly for Adu. He had lain awake most of the night planning his escape. Apia had decided to go to the farm to visit his palms. He felt he should allow Adu and Boy to have their freedom before taking them to the farm, so he had left early. Adu waited for some time after Apia had gone and then started his plan. Boy's mother was still in the kitchen getting the morning's meal ready when Adu took his traveling bag and vanished behind the house. Boy saw him going out and shivered. Adu waded through the bush and then came to the main path leading to the town. He kept looking around to see if anyone was coming towards him or following him. Twice, he saw people coming towards him and took cover in the bush till they passed. He got to the train station just in time to see the early morning train pulling away. He bit his lips for missing it. Now he had to wait for the late morning train, which sometimes came around midday. But he was determined. He entered the main hall of the passengers' lounge and sat in a far corner. He was hungry, but too cautious to buy food. He didn't want to be stopped. As he hid in the lounge, he imagined what might be happening. He was almost sure by then that his absence had been detected and that Boy had broken the news to Apia and his wife. He felt sorry to disappoint them, but he knew he was doing the right thing. Susa was now an impossible place for him to live. It was close to midday that the late morning train came by. He boarded it stealthily and hid in an obscure place in the third-class coach. As the train hooted and snaked out of the station, he knew in his heart that he would not see Susa for a long time. He relaxed. An hour later, he was in Boama. His only hope was to find Ofori and Becky at home. Susa was no longer good, and Boama held little hope. He didn't regret not going with Amma and her father, and he would never think of living with his aunt again. He hurried past the houses. People he met expressed surprise at seeing him. They thought he had gone to his father's village and wondered why he was back so soon. He gave everybody he met a prepared reply and resisted the urge to stop for more questions. The sun was blazing. The activities in Ofori's house were hectic. The tipper truck parked in front of the house was half full with his belongings. Some of his pupils were there to see that their teacher didn't lack help with his final packing. Some of them were there to see if there was anything left over from the packing. They went about their duty heartily, though once in a while, a pupil stopped to stare at the beloved teacher. Ofori himself was busy sorting out what items to pack and what to leave behind. Becky was with him. "Take this," Ofori told a pupil and handed him a broken flower vase. "That thing is cracked, dear," Becky protested, taking the vase from the boy. "I doubt whether it will survive the next journey." "Even if it did?" "Hey, Adu! Adu!" Everybody stopped and turned around. "Adu!" Becky yelled again and dropped the vase. Everyone was speechless. Adu was standing at the gate. When Becky called again, he moved slowly towards her. His bag was hanging on his shoulder as he took these faltering steps towards his hope of survival. Ofori and Becky had expressed their willingness to take him. Would they indeed do it? "Adu," Ofori called and held the boy's hand. Everybody looked on. What happened? Before Adu could answer, he broke down and wept. Adu led him to the room and tried to calm him down. What happened? Ofori asked again and waited for the boy to wipe his nose and eyes. Adu shook his head and said, I couldn't, teacher. I can't live in Susa. Everything there reminds me of my family. He sobbed. Ofori turned to Becky and said, I told you, Becky. I knew it couldn't happen. Then he turned to Adu. Listen, Adu. Becky and I have already discussed this. We will take you with us. Do you understand? You will make your home with us. Do not fear. God will keep you. He will turn your grief to joy. I don't think she would like to see me, Adu said again and turned away from the piercing glare of Ofori. But, Ofori said, do you want to see her? That was the question he'd feared Ofori would ask. It was the crux of the problem. The problem, Adu knew, was in his heart. It was his heart that refused to forgive. He didn't even want to see his aunt, so to ask him to forgive her was asking for the impossible. If he could not even bring himself to say, Auntie, I forgive you for all the wrong you've done against me, how could you think of saying, Please, Auntie, forgive me for all that I've done against you? What wrong had he done against his aunt? The question was in his mind and directed at Ofori. Was he the one who had wronged his aunt? Wasn't it his aunt who had wronged him by adding to the grief he bore? But he dared not translate his thoughts into words. The teacher and the pupil sat under a young palm tree in the compound of Ofori's three-room flat. The conversation, however, was between a man and his son. In the 6 months since they had moved from Buama to Nsupa, their new station, Adu did not see Ofori and Becky as teachers, but as parents. The newly married couple regarded Adu as their firstborn and treated him as such. Ofori was careful that what he was asking Adu to do would not be seen as a command or an instruction. If Adu said this was difficult, it must indeed be harder than the boy could convey. For this was surely the first time he had not spontaneously jumped at an opportunity to obey his new parent. Over the past 6 months, Ofori and his wife had found the boy easy to live with, quite beyond my expectation, you know, Becky had told her husband just a few days before. They were particularly grateful that Adu had lived by what he said Yaro had taught him. They were happy that Adu no longer talked about his parents with pain. The person he talked about more often was Amma. He hadn't seen the girl since they moved to Nsupa, and he said he missed her. The day he received a letter from Amma, Ofori and his wife knew at once that something unusually good had happened to the boy. He gave the letter to Becky to read. It was obvious that the girl had struggled to write, but she conveyed a message they were all glad to receive. Amma wrote that she was fine and that her father and her stepmother were proud and happy to have her. Becky was quick to notice that she said nothing about whether she herself was happy. Discussing Amma aroused Adu's desire to visit his friend. The person he avoided talking about was Guma, his aunt. Every time a reference to her came up in their conversation, Adu clearly showed his disgust. On the rare occasions when he talked about her, it was with such hatred that Ofori knew something must be done. That was the reason for this afternoon's chat between father and son. I know this is difficult for you, Adu, he said, considering all that you went through in your aunt's house. But let me ask you a question. Adu looked up. Do you know that you've also wronged your aunt? The crease in Adu's forehead showed that the feeling he closely guarded was out in the open. His eyes asked the question, what did I do? You hold something in your heart against your aunt. You hate her. You bear her bitterness and grudge because of all that she did to you. Am I right? Adu bowed his head. Ofori dropped his bump. Adu, you need to forgive her. Adu did not look up. It was true. But his aunt had started it all. When he followed her from Susa to Buama after the death of his family, what wrong did he do to her? It was a brutality towards him that had made him hate her. It was not his fault. Ofori said, I know you are thinking it was your aunt who started it all. Adu looked up in surprise. How did Ofori know what he was thinking? Ofori went on, but whenever you do anything wrong, it's better to admit it and do something about it than to blame someone else. Always remember, Adu, that our relationship with God, which your friend Yaro told you about affects our relationship with other people, no matter what they are like. He paused. Could Adu understand all this? Sometimes he wondered what sort of boy this was. A boy whose mind was older than his body, who understood things faster than boys of his age. But then this boy had experienced in 3 years more than most adults go through in a lifetime. He might or might not understand everything that was told to him now. But his peculiar situation demanded that he should be told and encouraged to take decisions that would help build his life for the future. As it is, Ofori continued, we've all wronged God one way or another and need his forgiveness. But did you know that when God forgives us, he makes it a condition that we forgive other people? Adu kept silent, but he was listening. He recalled how Yaro once told him the story of a man who refused to forgive a fellow debtor and was punished for his wicked action. Ofori looked straight at Adu and said, if you keep this bitterness against your aunt and refuse to forgive her, how can you expect God to forgive you? The words were sinking in. Adu's brow lost its crease and his body became less rigid. Ofori added, cautiously, you've got to ask for your aunt's forgiveness before she... He stopped. Did you hear that your aunt is seriously ill? Adu nodded. Becky had told him the night before. He sighed, but it was a sigh of consent. He said, I didn't know that I had wronged my aunt. I'll go. Ofori said no more. When it was obvious they would travel to Boama, Adu made a request. After Boama, he said, can we please go on to Abenasi to visit Amma and her family? Ofori said that would be fine. Mansa stared at the visitors and listened to their message. It was Becky's idea that instead of going straight to Gomez's house, it might be better to see Mansa first. Ofori would have preferred to go through the chief. But Becky insisted that it was better to approach the matter privately through Gomez's friend than officially through the chief. Mansa kept staring at Adu. And how are you, Adu? She asked. Adu said he was fine. I can see that, Mansa observed. It seems like you like your new place. They are taking care of you well. Tell us, Becky said. Can you please lead us to go and see Goma? We thought it would be fine if you went with us. Mansa agreed to go with them. Goma was dozing in an old armchair in front of a room when Mansa led the 3 visitors into a compound. A young girl was sweeping around the kitchen area. It was she who first heard the sound of approaching footsteps and rose up to see who the visitors were. Auntie, we have visitors, the girl announced, as she put down her broom and scrambled for the chairs. Goma jerked up and glared at the unexpected visitors. When she noticed who they were, she asked, what do you want? Let them sit down first, Mansa said, and took the seats the girl had provided. She urged the visitors to do same. Adu cast a quick glance around the compound. Not much has changed, except the presence of the girl, who it seemed occupied his former room. He had just seen her coming out of it, wearing a scarf. Perhaps his aunt had taken a maid to help her. Now he turned to see his aunt peering at him. For a split moment, a chill ran through him. Those eyes again. By this time, no bell sounded in him. He looked away from his aunt's gaze, but it was more out of respect than fear. Now he was confident that his aunt no longer had any powers over him. She could not destroy him. Ofori and Becky had assured him of that. The powers of darkness could not harm him because he had the Lord in his heart. As Ofori narrated the reasons for their visit, Adu began to feel sad for Goma. She was a lonely woman, wasn't she? Goma was the last person left of his father's family beside himself. If the 2 of them were to die, that would be the end of Nemo's lineage. With that fact came the realization of something else. He was an orphan. Quickly, Adu shook the thought out of his mind. It sounded ominous to him, yet it was true that he had no father and no mother. But he did not want to think about this anymore. He had come to understand that no child of God was ever an orphan. He had already decided to tear himself away from the crippling, gnawing feeling of loneliness that imprisoned him in the past. Why should what belonged to the past suddenly rear its head in the presence of his aunt? No, he rejected it. He determined in his heart, I am a child of God. I'm not alone. It was a personal determination. When it was time for him to speak, he stood up. He looked directly at his aunt and said, I, I, I'm sorry, Auntie, for all that I've done to you. I want you to forgive me. What are you sorry for? Kuma cut in, piercing Adu with a gaze that bewildered the boy. She meant to cow him into submission and break him down, but Adu stood firm. There was no fear in his heart. Suddenly Guma shouted, I say tell me what you've done, and stop looking at me like that. Adu was still standing and looking directly at the woman. For a brief moment, aunt and nephew were locked in their gaze. Finally, Guma looked away. I know why you people came, she said, but her voice was no longer harsh. You heard that I was sick, and you thought I was going to die, so you brought this boy to come and say words you've pumped into his mouth before I go. She said that calmly. No one spoke. I am not going to die now. Do you understand? The witches of Buama wanted me to die, but God has not killed me yet. Her voice trailed off and ended in a tremble. Ofori saw that the woman was not as ill as the report had said. Her words sparked a feeling of guilt in him. She was right. He had imagined, if that wild report was even half true, that the woman was in bad shape and might die. As he turned away from her eyes, Adu began to speak again. The words I'm speaking are my own words, aunt, he said. No one put them in my mouth. Everyone sat up. I'm sorry about this, but I hated you. Because of what happened, I didn't like you. I hated you. He paused and then continued. But now I no longer hate you. I have nothing in my heart against you anymore. I want you to forgive me. Guma was not looking at him. The silence was heavy and unpredictable. Then as he studied his aunt's face, he saw the strangest thing. His aunt was wiping tears from her eyes. Nobody spoke for a long time. It was Mansa who finally said, It's all right, Guma, my friend. The boy is sorry. Life is like that. It may seem bad today, but tomorrow something good will follow. Adu is still your nephew, your own brother's son. He's just a child. He will grow up, and when he grows up, who knows? He may be the one to... Mansa stopped because Guma rose up and entered her room. When she came out again, the tears were gone. Let's forget everything, she said. Then, as if to prevent any further discussion, she added quickly, Where is Amma? The question was directed at Ofori. We hear she's fine, Ofori replied, but we don't know for sure. Guma sighed loudly. She bit hard into her lips. Her mouth twisted in regret, and she sighed again, but she said nothing. Later, when the Oforis and Adu left Buama to visit Amma and her parents in Abenase, Adu felt that a heavy burden had been lifted from his neck. Adu was impressed. He had been told that Abenase was a small town, but now that he had seen the place, he was impressed with its beauty. There were more trees in this town than in Supa, where he lived now with the Oforis. He could not miss the yellow canary birds making so much noise among several of the trees as they wove their nests. They were a powerful reminder of Susa. Ofori, Adu and Becky were waiting in Yeboah's compound. When they had arrived, someone told them that the entire Yeboah family had gone to the cocoa buying yard, where they were helping Yeboah's farmers to bag the dry cocoa beans. The visitors did not have to wait for long before they saw someone running towards them. Adu! 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 It was Amma. She ran up to Adu and hugged him. Amma! Adu began, but didn't know what else to say. When did you arrive here? Just now. Go and greet Teacher Ofori and Miss Annan. Sorry, Mrs. Ofori. Amma walked shyly towards her former teacher. Amma, said Becky, before Amma got to her, you look nice. How are you? I'm fine, Miss Annan. Thank you. Now you should call me Mrs. Ofori. Becky said, You look really nice, Amma. We were concerned about you. Yeboah, his wife, and 2 children came up to greet them. It's good to see you again, Mr. Ofori. Amma has told me a lot about you. She kept telling us how you were going to marry her teacher. Everybody laughed. Now, Yeboah continued, feeling excited. You haven't met my family, have you? No, said Becky. We are glad to meet the rest of them. We know Amma. Yes, of course. This is my wife, Akos, and our 2 children, Kobe and Ajo. But please, come into the room. Ado and Amma waited outside to talk. They shared all that had happened to them and compared feelings. You didn't reply to my letter. That was Amma. Ado attempted an excuse. I knew we would come and see you soon, but I'll write to you when I get back, I promise. Later, when they were about to part company again, Ado said to Amma, I told you that you would be alright and that your stepmother will not be like my aunt. Amma's reply surprised Ado. My stepmother is very kind to me, she said. She encourages me and calls me her daughter, just like my mother used to. Who used to call you? I meant your aunt. The 2 friends were silent. Amma's mistake was not a light one. It would take some time to correct it. Let me tell you, Adu, since I came here, I've dreamt about her more than 10 times. I can't think of her not being my mother. I know my stepmother is kind to me, my father likes me, my stepbrother and sister are fine, but I still feel I'm a stranger here, and that your aunt's place is where I belong. Adu took one look at Amma and knew the girl was serious. What could he say? Amma, he began, it will be alright. I felt the same when I went away with Teacher Ofori. There were times when I felt I was a stranger there, but I knew it was the best place for me. I know it will not be too long before you get used to this place. Amma did not answer, but she knew Adu was right. The epilogue. 11 years passed, almost too swiftly. On a lonely newly tarred lane that ran through recently built flats in Abenase, 2 friends strolled side by side. Dusk was approaching, but they were not in a hurry to part. It was a quiet Sunday evening. Around them, a gentle wind stirred the young trees that lined the streets. Not many people used this street of the suburb, and so the 2 friends had a place to themselves. Their only companions were the 3-day-old moon and a few bright stars already in the sky. The moon and the stars seemed to walk up and down with them. I love the moon, Amma said. Me too, Adu replied. It's beautiful. They strolled silently on. Do you know why the moon always appears in the evening with 2 or 3 very bright stars to accompany her? Adu asked. Amma thought for some time and said, I wasn't taught that one at school. Well, there was a triumph in Adu's voice and a smile on his face. The moon is the lady and the stars are the young men. Every star in the sky wants... He suppressed the laughter hiding in his cheeks. You cooked that one up, said Amma, surveying Adu's face to confirm a suspicion. Who told you this? My mother. She said beautiful moons never lacked stars to pursue them. Amma only chuckled. Silence overtook them again. Adu had something to tell Amma this evening. He had kept it to himself for many months, since the pulse in his heart began to nag him to it. This evening, he must tell her, but there was no hurry. He took his time. The smile he had tried to suppress returned, but it was not for the moon and her lovers. It was for himself. He couldn't believe that all this was happening to him, that he, once a child of grief, was no longer a child, nor grieved. He had never thought he would be able to smile on his life as he could today. Him, of all people. 11 years ago, he had taken those shaky steps into a future he knew nothing about. For 11 years, he had tasted the kindness of a couple who became his parents, Ofori and Becky. He had grown to love them, and their 3 children, especially the little boy who chose to call him uncle, although the others called him big brother. Thank God, he said that aloud. Amma heard it. She looked at him and asked, what for? For everything, for everybody, for you, for me, for Ofori and Becky, for your father and stepmother, for everybody who has helped us. For Yarrow, Amma contributed. For Yarrow, of course, another spell of silence. Two people overtook them on the lane and hastened towards one of the flats. Dusk was fully here and the streets were well lit. A few fireflies sparkled on and off in the air, crisscrossing one another, but Adu and Amma were oblivious to them. And for Yarrow, Adu feasted on that thought. But for Yarrow, he would probably be dead. Yarrow was the man who first taught him the steps of practical faith in God. He knew now that it was no ordinary thing Yarrow had given him. Where would he be without the faith in God that sustained him in those fragile moments when he would otherwise have chosen death? As his faith had gained ground these past 11 years, he had begun to ask for something special for Yarrow. Yarrow was as lonely as Adu himself, a wandering man with no family who insisted that God was enough family for him. Often Adu prayed that God would give Yarrow a family of his own. Now he smiled at the direct answer to his prayer, for recently he had heard that Yarrow had indeed married a young woman from his own tribe. No, he had never thought that life could smile on him again, or that he could smile on life. But now here he was, a teacher. He loved Ofori and Becky, and he loved their profession as well. After his elementary education, he had decided to train as a teacher. He enrolled in a teacher training college for 4 years, and after that began to teach in the primary school. In all these years, he had not broken contact with Amma. Something more than friendship had begun to grow between them as they matured into young adults. It was no surprise to Ofori and Becky or to Amma and her parents when 2 years before Adu had asked for a transfer to Abenase. For accommodation, he got one of the newly built flats in this quiet suburb. Since he had moved to this place, Amma had come to know the area as well as she knew the place where she lived with her parents. Perhaps I should move into one of these flats, said Amma. It was a deliberate attempt to break the silence. Adu smiled. Exactly why do you want to come and live here? He asked, in a voice that implied he knew the answer. Who said it's because of you I want to come here? I just like the flats. Can't you see they are beautiful? I know. They both laughed. Besides, Amma began and stopped. Go on, besides. Nothing. No, seriously, I want to know. Do you know how old I am? At my age, don't you think I deserve my own flat? Oh yes, of course. The mocking tone in his voice was still there. They strolled on. More stars had appeared to woo the moon, but the evening was still young. There is no condition that is permanent. Adu recalled a favorite saying of Teacher Ofori. He didn't need anybody to tell him that was true. If not, he would be a grief child still. But the years of grief were over. Through the pains of loss and deprivation, he had learned that with God, all things are possible. He no longer dreaded the future, nor the past, nor anything that threatened to snatch his peace away. No condition was permanent. Or else he would still be under his aunt's heavy arm. Something really puzzled him about his aunt. He turned to see if Amma was ready for the question that popped into his mind. Her face was calm, but she was clearly engrossed in her own thoughts. He decided not to interrupt her. In any case, he did not know how Amma would feel if he were to start discussing Goma with her. The years had eventually broken those mother and daughter ties between his aunt and Amma as the girl grew to love her new home and people. But he thought it better not to mention the subject. This evening was too nice to spoil. He shelved his own thoughts. It was not important, but he was puzzled all the same. How did his aunt survive the illness that everyone thought would kill her? Tougher still, she had not only survived the sickness, but had come through the traumatic experience of having a daughter and a nephew snatched from her. Adu had paid her a number of visits, but his most cherished memory was of the day he openly confessed his bitterness against her and asked her for forgiveness. Adu turned his mind to Amma. Yes, she did deserve her own apartment. She was a grown-up woman now. She had completed a secretarial course in Abenase, their hometown, and settled down to work as a secretary at the Ministry of Health. I like the way you type, Adu suddenly remarked. Amma laughed. How did this connect with their conversation? Suddenly, Adu felt this was the moment he had been waiting for. He was 25 and ready for marriage. And whenever he thought of it, no woman came to his mind but Amma. They shared the same faith and a similar past. They had prayed together, cried together, shared moments of deep concern, and encouraged one another. Amma was the woman for him. He picked his words carefully. Listen, Amma, I'm looking into the future and us living together as husband and wife. That's what I've been wanting to tell you, to find out from you. You said you wanted to have your own flat, and I'm asking you to come and join me. The reason I asked you for this walk was so that I could ask you to marry me. I love you, and I know you know it. She did know it. She had known Adu would bring up the subject soon, but not this evening. Some of her friends at the hospital had asked her if she had any man in mind. She always said yes. That kept the men away. Now there was no need to pretend or hide. Adu was her man. She stopped. Adu turned to her with a question on his lips, but he had no time to ask it. Amma said, I love you, Adu, very much. They stood face to face in the middle of the lane. Their shining eyes told the story of their longing for each other. Impulsively, Adu hugged Amma as tightly as he could. He kissed her and she kissed him. They knew that they belonged to one another.